What if I told you that hidden inside a forgotten piano covered in dust and abandoned in a New Orleans warehouse was a piece of American history so profound it would make scholars weep? What if that piano held blood-stained sheet music written by a man whose name had been erased from history, whose music had never been heard, and whose story would change everything we thought we knew about the birth of American music? This is that story. My name is Diane Foster, and I'm a musical instrument restoration specialist. I've spent 20 years of my life bringing forgotten instruments back to life. I've restored violins that played in European concert halls, guitars that survived wars, cellos that crossed oceans. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found inside a piano on a Tuesday morning in October. I'm standing in my workshop right now, looking at 15 pages of handwritten sheet music. The paper is brown with age. The ink has faded to a ghostly gray, and there, unmistakable even after 150 years, are dark brown stains. Blood. Human blood. At the bottom of the last page, written in a hand that trembled so badly the letters barely hold together, are 8 words that haunt me every single day. If you find this, play it. Let them hear us. Let me take you back to where this began. 3 weeks ago, before I knew the name Thomas Freeman, before I understood what I was holding, before everything changed, 3 weeks ago I received a phone call that seemed utterly ordinary. A woman named Patricia Henderson had inherited her grandmother's estate in the Garden District. She was liquidating everything: furniture, paintings, jewelry, and one upright piano that had been sitting in her grandmother's attic for as long as anyone could remember. Patricia's exact words were, "It's old, it's ugly, and I need it gone. You want it? You can have it for $300. I almost said no. My workshop was already full. I had a 1920s Steinway waiting for new hammers, a Civil War-era banjo that needed complete reconstruction, and a stack of client work that would keep me busy through Christmas. But something in her voice made me pause. Maybe it was the way she said old, like she was apologizing for wasting my time with something worthless. I've learned over 2 decades in this business that old and ugly sometimes means rare and valuable. So I said yes. The next morning I drove to an estate sale warehouse on Chupitulas Street. The place smelled like mold and mothballs and forgotten lives. There were boxes stacked to the ceiling, furniture draped in sheets, portraits of people whose names no one remembered anymore. And they're shoved into a corner between a broken armoire and a stack of water-damaged books was the piano. My first thought was that Patricia had been right. It was ugly. The finish was almost entirely gone. The wood was scratched and gouged. One leg had been replaced with what looked like a table leg that didn't quite match. The keys were yellowed, and several were chipped. It looked like something you'd find on a curb with a free sign taped to it. But then I got closer. I ran my hand along the case, and beneath the decades of neglect, I felt something. The grain of the wood was unusual. The joints were hand-cut, not machine-made. There were details carved into the panel above the keys so worn I could barely make them out. But they were there. Someone had spent hours, maybe days, carving decorative elements into this piano. I lifted the lid and looked inside. The soundboard was cracked, but intact. The strings were rusty, but all present. The hammers were worn down to almost nothing, but the mechanism was still there, still complete. And then I saw it. Burned into the wood of the inner frame, almost invisible, unless you knew where to look, were words. Faint, uneven letters that looked like they'd been made with a hot poker or a brand for those who cannot speak. I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just an old piano. This was someone's statement, someone's declaration, someone's act of defiance or hope or desperation. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. The carved details, the handmade joints, the burned words. Then I called Patricia back and told her I'd take it. She seemed almost relieved to have it gone. Getting the piano back to my workshop took 3 hours, and the help of 2 very patient movers who kept asking me if I was sure this thing was worth saving. I didn't have a good answer. I just knew I had to see what was underneath all that damage. My workshop is in the Bywater neighborhood, in a converted warehouse with high ceilings and huge windows that let in the kind of natural light you need for detail work. I've got benches covered in tools, shelves full of spare parts and half-finished instruments in various states of resurrection all around me. I cleared my main work table, and we set the piano down as gently as we could. After the movers left, I just stood there for a long moment looking at it. Really looking at it. In restoration work, there's a moment that happens with every piece. A moment where the object stops being just wood and metal and glue and becomes a story. A connection to someone who lived before you, who touched these same surfaces, who put their hope or their love or their desperation into making or playing or keeping this thing. I was feeling that moment now stronger than I'd felt it in years. I started with the exterior. I took detailed photographs from every angle. I measured every dimension. I documented every scratch, every gouge, every mark. Then I began the careful process of cleaning. I used the gentlest cleaners I had working in small sections, removing decades of grime and dust and whatever else had accumulated. As I cleaned, details started to emerge. The carved decorations I'd barely been able to see before became clearer. They weren't European-style flourishes like you'd see on most pianos from that era. They were different. Geometric patterns. Symbols I didn't recognize. Designs that felt African in origin, though I couldn't be sure. I kept cleaning, kept discovering. There were initials carved into the back panel. TF. Just those 2 letters barely visible, hidden where no one would see them unless they were looking for them. There were tool marks on the joints that told me this piano had been built by hand by someone who knew what they were doing but didn't have access to factory equipment. There were repairs that had been made over the years, using whatever materials were available. I found a hammer that had been repaired with a piece of leather that looked like it came from a shoe. I found a string that had been replaced with wire that was clearly not meant for pianos. Every detail told me the same thing. Whoever made this piano, whoever played it, whoever kept it alive all these years, they didn't have money. They didn't have resources, but they had skill. They had determination. They had love for this instrument. I opened the lid fully and examined the interior. The soundboard had multiple cracks, which wasn't surprising given the age and the condition. But the cracks had been repaired carefully, expertly, with thin strips of wood glued into place. Someone had known how to do this work. I looked at the strings. Most of them were original, I could tell by the way they were wound the patina on the metal. A few had been replaced over the years, but whoever did the replacing had tried to match the originals as closely as possible. I examined the hammer assembly. The felt was almost completely worn away, but the wooden cores were still solid. The action was stiff from decades of disuse, but it was intact. And then I saw something that made me stop breathing. On the inside of the panel, hidden, unless you removed certain components and looked from a very specific angle, were drawings. Charcoal drawings. Rough, simple, but unmistakable. They showed figures in a field, figures bent over working, figures that looked like they were picking cotton. My hands started shaking. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew who might be able to help me understand what I was looking at. Dr. Samuel Richardson is a historian specializing in African American music and culture in the post-Civil War South. I'd met him 5 years earlier when I was restoring a banjo that turned out to have connections to a freed slave community in Mississippi. He'd helped me understand the historical context, and we'd stayed in touch. When he answered the phone, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Samuel, I need you to come to my workshop, now. I've found something." There must have been something in my voice because he didn't ask questions. He just said, "Give me 40 minutes." He arrived in 35. Samuel is a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and glasses that are always sliding down his nose. He's soft-spoken and methodical, the kind of scholar who measures his words carefully. But when he walked into my workshop and saw the piano, he wasn't soft-spoken at all. "Dear God," he whispered. "Where did you find this?" I told him everything. The estate sale, the warehouse, the carved details, the burned words, the charcoal drawings. He moved closer, running his fingers over the wood with a reverence that told me he understood immediately that this was something significant. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the interior. I nodded. He spent the next hour examining every inch of that piano. He took out a magnifying glass and studied the carved patterns. He photographed the charcoal drawings from multiple angles. He examined the burned words with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Finally, he straightened up and looked at me. "Diane, do you know what you have here?" I shook my head. This piano was built by hand, probably between 1865 and 1870. The craftsmanship suggests someone with training, but the materials and the improvised repairs suggest someone with limited resources. The African motifs in the carvings, the imagery in the charcoal drawings, the burned inscription, they all point to the same conclusion. He paused, and I could see his hands trembling slightly. This piano was built by a freed slave, or possibly built while the maker was still enslaved and finished after emancipation. Either way, this is an artifact from one of the most crucial periods in American history. The years immediately following the Civil War, when 4 million people were suddenly free but had nothing. No money, no education, no resources. And yet they built, they created, they made music. I felt something lodge in my throat. The burned words, Samuel continued, pointing to the inscription inside. "For those who cannot speak." That's not just a dedication, that's a mission statement. Whoever built this piano, they built it to give voice to people who had been silenced, to create beauty in the midst of oppression, to make art when art was the only freedom they had. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe. Or fear. We need to examine this more carefully. We need to date it precisely. We need to find out who TF was. We need to understand the full story of this instrument. I nodded. "Where do we start?" "We start," he said, "by taking this piano apart. Carefully. Methodically. Because I have a feeling there's more to find." He was right. He was so very right. Over the next week, I began the painstaking process of disassembling the piano. This isn't like taking apart a modern instrument where everything is standardized and documented. This was a hand-built piece, which meant every component was unique. Every joint was custom-made. Every piece fit together in a way that made sense only to the person who built it. I worked slowly. I photographed every step. I labeled every piece. I made detailed notes about how things fit together, where the joints were, how the builder had solved various structural problems. Samuel came by every day, watching occasionally, offering observations, mostly just being present. He understood that this wasn't just restoration work. This was archaeology. We were excavating someone's life. The first major discovery came when I removed the key slip, the wooden strip that runs along the front of the keyboard. Behind it, hidden from view, unless you removed that specific piece, were more charcoal drawings. These were more detailed than the ones I'd found earlier. They showed a small house, barely more than a shack. They showed people gathered around what looked like a fire. They showed musical notes, rough approximations of a staff with notes scattered across it. He was teaching himself, Samuel said quietly. Or someone was teaching him. Look at those notes. They're not quite right. Not quite standard notation, but someone was trying to learn how music was written down. I kept disassembling, kept discovering. Behind the upper panel, I found fabric. Old, deteriorating fabric that had once been some kind of deep blue, but was now faded to almost gray. It was wrapped around the hammers, I realized, to muffle the sound. Someone had needed to play this piano quietly. Someone had needed to practice without being heard. Slave codes, Samuel said when I showed him the fabric. In many southern states, even after the war, there were restrictions on when and where black people could gather, what kind of noise they could make. Playing piano openly might have been dangerous, so they muffled it. They practiced in secret. Every piece I removed revealed something new. A string that had been repaired with wire that clearly came from a fence. A hammer that had been reinforced with a piece of bone, probably from a chicken or a pig. A joint that had been glued together with what looked like homemade adhesive, maybe flour paste or tree resin. This piano had been maintained, loved, kept alive through sheer determination and resourcefulness. I removed the music desk, the angled piece where sheet music would rest. Behind it, carved directly into the wood where no one would ever see it, unless they knew to look, was a date, 1867. 2 years after the war ended, Samuel murmured. 2 years after emancipation. He was free when he built this. Or finished it, at least. I kept working. The piano was slowly coming apart in my hands, revealing its secrets layer by layer. I removed the fallboard, the piece that covers the keys when the piano isn't in use. On the underside, invisible, unless you removed it completely, was more writing. The same shaky hand that had burned the earlier inscription had written in charcoal, "Built by Thomas and Sons, 1867. For the glory of God and the freedom of our people. Thomas. T.F. Thomas. Freeman, perhaps? Thomas Franklin. Thomas something. We had a name now, or part of one. I removed the action, the complex mechanism that connects the keys to the hammers. As I lifted it out, something fell from inside the piano. Something that had been hidden in a space between the soundboard and the inner frame. It was a small piece of wood carved into the shape of a cross. Simple. Rough. But clearly made with care. I turned it over and found more writing. Sarah Freeman, 1869. Rest in peace, beloved wife. Samuel and I looked at each other. He lost someone, I said softly. He built this piano, and then 2 years later he lost his wife. He kept building, though, Samuel replied. He kept creating. He kept making music even through grief. I carefully set the carved cross aside and continued the disassembly. I removed the bottom panel, expecting to find just the structural supports and maybe more dust. Instead, I found something that made me stop breathing. There was another panel behind the bottom panel. A false back. A hidden space. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Samuel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something here." He moved closer, peering over my shoulder. The hidden panel was held in place by wooden pegs, not nails or screws. Pegs that could be removed and replaced without leaving obvious marks. Pegs that suggested this panel had been designed to be opened and closed. This was intentional. This was a hiding place. I looked at Samuel. "Should I?" He nodded, but I could see his hands shaking. I carefully worked the pegs loose one by one. The panel shifted. I grasped the edges and slowly, so slowly, pulled it away from the frame. Behind it was a space about 18 inches wide, 12 inches tall, and maybe 4 inches deep. And in that space, wrapped in a piece of cloth that might once have been white, but was now the color of old parchment, was a package. I reached in with trembling hands and lifted it out. The fabric crumbled slightly at my touch, releasing a smell of old paper and time and secrets. I carried the package to my work table and set it down under the bright LED lamp I use for detail work. Samuel stood beside me, and I could hear his breathing quick and shallow. "Whatever's in there," he said quietly. "It's been hidden for over 150 years. Thomas Freeman hid this, and he wanted someone to find it." I carefully unwrapped the outer layer of fabric. It fell away in pieces too deteriorated to hold together. Inside was another layer. Oilcloth, I thought, or something like it. Something meant to protect what was inside from moisture and time. I unwrapped that layer, and there, preserved in the darkness of that hidden space for 153 years, was a stack of paper. Sheet music. 15 pages of handwritten sheet music. And on top of them, folded carefully, was a letter. I stared at the pages spread across my work table, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The paper was brown with age, fragile as moth wings. The ink had faded to a ghostly gray-brown, but it was still legible. Barely. The handwriting was uneven, the letters formed with obvious effort, as if the writer wasn't entirely comfortable with literacy. But it was there. Real. Tangible. A voice from 150 years ago speaking directly to us. Samuel pulled over a stool and sat down heavily, like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "May I?" he asked, reaching for the letter. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He unfolded it with infinite care. The paper crackled softly, threatening to split along the creases. We both held our breath. The letter was written on both sides of a single sheet, the handwriting cramped and dense, as if the writer had been trying to fit as much as possible onto the limited space. Some words were crossed out and rewritten. Some sentences ran together, but it was readable. Samuel began to read aloud, his voice soft and reverent. "To whoever finds this, my name is Thomas Freeman. I am writing this in the year of our Lord, 1867, in the city of New Orleans, in the state of Louisiana. I am a free man, though I was not born free. I was born a slave on the Beaumont plantation in St. Charles Parish in the year 1840. I do not know the exact day, as such things were not marked for people like me." Samuel paused, clearing his throat. "I am writing this because I am afraid my music will be lost. I am afraid that everything I have learned, everything I have created will disappear when I am gone. And so I am hiding these pages inside this piano, which I built with my own hands, and the hands of my sons, in the hope that someday someone will find them and play what I have written." I felt tears beginning to blur my vision. I blinked them back, not wanting to miss a single word. Samuel continued reading. I learned music in secret when I was still enslaved. The master's daughter, Miss Carolyn, she played piano every day. I was a house servant, and my job was to tend the fires and carry water and be invisible. But when she played, I could not help but listen. The sound went into my head and would not leave. At night, when everyone slept, I would sneak to the music room. I taught myself to read the notes on the sheet music Miss Caroline left on the piano. I taught myself which keys made which sounds. I could not practice much for fear of being heard, but I learned. Slowly, carefully. Miss Caroline discovered me one night. I thought she would tell the master, and I would be whipped or worse. But she did not. She was kind. She began to leave the music room door unlocked. She began to leave certain pieces of music out, pieces she said I might enjoy. She never spoke of it directly, but she knew. And she helped. Samuel's voice cracked slightly. He paused, composing himself. When the war came, everything changed. The master's family left for Richmond. The plantation was chaos. Some of the slaves ran away. Some stayed, not knowing what else to do. I stayed because Miss Caroline asked me to watch over her piano. She made me promise. I kept that promise. I protected that piano through the war, through the occupation, through all the madness. And when Miss Caroline came back in 1865, after the war ended, she found the piano intact and me still there. She wept. She thanked me. And then she did something I will never forget. She gave me the piano. She said, "Thomas, this piano is yours. You loved it better than I ever did. You deserve to have it." But I could not take her piano. It would not have been right. So instead I asked her to teach me properly. Officially. Every day for 6 months she gave me lessons. She taught me theory harmony composition. She treated me as a student, not a servant. She gave me the gift of true musical knowledge. When she married and moved away, she left me all her sheet music and some money, enough to buy lumber and wire and felt, enough to build my own piano. And so I did. I built this piano with my sons, James and Robert. We worked for 2 years. We had no factory tools, no proper materials. We used what we could find and what we could afford. But we built it. And it plays. It makes music. But the music I wanted to make was not the music Miss Caroline taught me. That music is beautiful, but it is not mine. I wanted to make music that sounded like my people. Music that had the rhythms we sang in the fields, the call and response we learned in church, the sorrow and the joy, and the hope of being free after being bound. I tried to write it down. I tried to capture on paper the music I heard in my head, the music I had been creating in secret all these years. Music that sounds like Africa and America, and something new, something that did not exist before. But when I played this music for others, they did not understand. They said it was not proper. They said it did not follow the rules. They said it sounded strange, wrong, uncivilized. I stopped playing it publicly, but I could not stop creating it. So I wrote it down, all of it, every piece I could remember. And I am hiding it here in the piano I built, in the hope that someday the world will be ready to hear it. If you have found this, then you are that person. You are the one who was meant to hear this music. Please, I beg you, play it. Let the world hear what we created. Let them know that we had beauty in us, even when we were told we had nothing. Let them hear us. Samuel's voice broke on the last words. He set the letter down carefully and removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just stared at the pages of music, at the evidence of a man's entire creative life hidden away for 150 years, waiting to be heard. "He invented jazz," Samuel finally whispered. Or proto-jazz, at least. Before it had a name. Before anyone was writing it down. He was combining African rhythms with European harmony, creating something new. And no one was ready for it. I picked up the first page of sheet music with trembling hands. The notation was uneven, not quite standard, but I could read it. I could see the rhythms he was trying to capture. Syncopated, complex, full of life. "We have to play this," I said. "We have to honor his request." "We will," Samuel promised. "We absolutely will. But first we need to understand who Thomas Freeman was. We need to find him in the historical record. We need to give him back his name, his story, his legacy." I nodded. "Where do we start?" "We start," he said, with the archives. Over the next 3 days, Samuel and I barely slept. We worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession, driven by the need to understand everything we could about Thomas Freeman and the world he lived in. Samuel started with the basics. Census records, church registries, property records, anything that might mention a Thomas Freeman in New Orleans in the years following the Civil War. I worked on preserving the sheet music. I created protective sleeves for each page. I photographed everything in high resolution, creating digital backups that would survive even if the originals deteriorated. I began the careful process of transcribing the music into modern notation, trying to capture exactly what Thomas had written while making it playable for contemporary musicians. On the second day, Samuel called me, his voice electric with excitement. I found him. "Diane, I found him." I drove to Tulane University, where Samuel had an office and access to the historical archives. He had paper spreads across every surface, books stacked in towers, and his laptop open to multiple database windows. "Look," he said, pointing to a scanned document on his screen. 1870 census, Thomas Freeman, age 30, listed as Negro, occupation, listed as laborer and musician. Living in the Treme neighborhood with his wife Sarah, age 25, and 2 sons, James, age 7, and Robert, age 5. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make out the handwritten entries. "Now look at this," Samuel continued, pulling up another document. Property records from 1868. Thomas Freeman purchased a small plot of land in Treme, paid $40 for it. The deed describes a wooden structure suitable for habitation and a small workshop. He pulled up another window. And this, an advertisement from the New Orleans Tribune dated 1869. Piano tuning and repair services offered by Thomas Freeman, formerly of the Beaumont Estate. Reasonable rates. Inquire at residence in Treme. He was advertising as a piano technician. He was using the skills he'd developed to make a living. "There's more," Samuel said. He handed me a printout of a newspaper clipping, faded and barely legible. But there. This is from the New Orleans Republican, April 1868. It's a short piece about a musical performance at a church in Treme. Listen to this. The entertainment concluded with a piano performance by Mr. Thomas Freeman, a local Negro musician of unusual talent. His compositions, though unorthodox in structure, displayed a rhythmic complexity and emotional depth that held the audience in rapt attention. It is the opinion of this writer that Mr. Freeman's music, while not conforming to European standards, possesses a unique quality that may represent a distinctly American sound. I read the clipping 3 times, my heart pounding. "They heard it," I whispered. Someone heard what he was doing and recognized it as something new. One person, Samuel said quietly. One journalist in one small newspaper. And then nothing. No other mentions of Thomas Freeman's compositions. No record of any other performances. The trail goes cold after 1869. What happened in 1869? I asked. Samuel pulled up another document. Sarah Freeman died. July 1869. Death certificate lists cause of death as consumption, which probably means tuberculosis. She was 25 years old. I thought of the carved cross I'd found in the piano. Sarah Freeman, 1869. Rest in peace, beloved wife. He lost his wife, I said, and he stopped performing publicly. Samuel nodded. There are a few more mentions of him in property tax records, paying his taxes every year, keeping his small plot of land. An occasional mention in church records. But nothing about music, nothing about performances. It's like he disappeared, musically speaking. When did he die? I asked. Samuel's expression grew sad. 1889. 20 years after Sarah's death. The death certificate lists his age as 49, cause of death as natural causes, which could mean anything. He's buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery in Tremé. An unmarked grave. A man of such talent, such creativity, such courage buried and forgotten. There's something else, Samuel said. He pulled up one final document. This is from the archives of the Beaumont family. I had to call in a favor to get access to it. It's a letter from Carolyn Beaumont Montgomery, the daughter Thomas mentioned to her sister, dated 1890, the year after Thomas died. He began to read. I learned recently of the death of Thomas Freeman, who was once a servant in our household. I do not know if you remember him, but he was the man I taught to play piano during the difficult years after the war. He had such extraordinary talent, Sarah. Such a gift. He created music unlike anything I had ever heard, music that combined the songs of his people with the techniques of our European traditions. I encouraged him to share his work with the world, but the world was not ready. They called his music primitive, uncivilized. They broke his spirit. And so he stopped playing publicly, though I know he never stopped creating. I only hope that somewhere, somehow, his music survived. It deserves to be heard. Samuel's voice broke on the last sentence. We sat in silence for a long moment. She knew, I finally said. She knew what he'd created was important. She knew, but she couldn't change the world's mind. Samuel replied. Thomas Freeman created something revolutionary, something that wouldn't be recognized or valued for another 40 or 50 years. He was too early, too ahead of his time. I thought about those pages of music hidden away for 153 years. Thomas had known the world wasn't ready, so he'd hidden his work with a prayer that someday someone would find it and understand. We need to play this music, I said. We need to give him the recognition he deserved. Samuel nodded. But we need to do it right. We need to find the right musician, someone who can understand what Thomas was trying to do, someone who can honor his intention while making it accessible to modern audiences. I know someone, I said. I think I know exactly the right person. Before we could move forward with performing Thomas Freeman's music, we needed to verify everything. Samuel's research had given us a framework, but we needed more. We needed to be absolutely certain of our facts, of our timeline of Thomas's story. Samuel assembled a team of experts, historians specializing in the Reconstruction era, musicologists who studied early African American music, archivists who could help us dig deeper into the historical record, even a forensic document examiner who could verify the age and authenticity of the letter and the sheet music. The forensic examiner was a woman named Dr. Patricia Chang, who worked with museums and archives authenticating historical documents. She came to my workshop with a portable laboratory in several large cases full of equipment I didn't recognize. She spent hours examining the letter and the sheet music. She used microscopes to analyze the paper fibers. She used spectroscopy to study the ink. She used ultraviolet light to reveal any hidden marks or alterations. Finally, she looked up at us with a smile. Everything checks out. The paper is consistent with what was available in the 1860s, likely made from cotton rag. The ink is iron gall ink, which is correct for the period. The oxidation patterns on the ink are consistent with documents from that era. There are no signs of modern intervention or forgery. Based on my analysis, I can say with confidence that these documents were created in the mid to late 1860s. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Not that I had doubted the authenticity, but having expert confirmation meant we could move forward without any questions. The musicologists were equally thorough. Dr. James Holland, a professor at the University of New Orleans, who specialized in the origins of jazz, spent 2 full days going through Thomas's compositions, analyzing the structure, the harmonies, the rhythmic patterns. "This is extraordinary," he kept saying, shaking his head in wonder. "This is absolutely extraordinary." When he finished his analysis, he called Samuel and me into his office. "I've studied every documented early example of what would become jazz. The earliest recordings we have are from the 1910s and 1920s. The earliest written compositions that show jazz characteristics date from the 1890s. But this, he pointed to Thomas's sheet music. This predates everything we have by at least 20 years. He pulled up a musical score on his computer screen. Look at this. This is Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag, published in 1899. It's considered one of the foundational pieces of ragtime, which was a precursor to jazz. Now look at Thomas Freeman's composition here. He placed one of Thomas's pages next to the screen. See the syncopation? The way the rhythm shifts and plays against the expected beat. That's a hallmark of ragtime and jazz, but Thomas was doing it 30 years before Joplin. And look at this section here. This is a call and response pattern exactly like what you'd hear in African American spirituals and work songs. Thomas was explicitly incorporating those traditions into composed piano music. This is fusion. This is innovation. This is the birth of a new American music happening in real time. Dr. Holland sat back in his chair, his expression almost reverential. If I had to guess, based on the characteristics of this music, I'd say Thomas Freeman was creating what we might call proto-jazz, or pre-ragtime. He was taking the musical traditions of enslaved Africans, the rhythms and structures they'd maintained across generations, and combining them with the European musical training he'd received from Caroline Beaumont. The result is something entirely new, something that wouldn't be widely accepted or recognized for decades, but something that was absolutely revolutionary. Why wasn't it recognized? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Dr. Holland's expression grew somber. Because of who Thomas Freeman was, because of the color of his skin, and the fact that he'd been enslaved. In the 1860s and 1870s, in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, the idea that a black man could create sophisticated, innovative music was threatening to a lot of people. It challenged their assumptions about racial hierarchy, about who was capable of creating art and culture. Thomas's music would have been dismissed as primitive or crude, not because of any actual lack of quality, but because of the prejudices of the time. It would take another generation, maybe 2, before this kind of music would be accepted and celebrated. By that time, Thomas Freeman was long dead and forgotten. The weight of that reality settled over all of us. A man had created something beautiful and important, and the world had rejected it simply because of who he was. "We can't change the past," Samuel said quietly. "But we can change the present. We can make sure Thomas Freeman's name is known. We can make sure his music is heard. We can give him the recognition he deserved." The team continued their research over the next week. They found more census records, more property documents, more fragments of Thomas Freeman's life. They found church records showing that he was a deacon at St. Augustine Church in Tremé. They found a mention in a city directory from 1875, listing him as a piano tuner. They even found a photograph, though they couldn't be certain it was him. The photograph showed a man standing in front of a small wooden house. He was wearing a simple suit, looking directly at the camera, with an expression that was neither smiling nor stern. Just present. Just there. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in faded pencil, "Freeman, 1870. I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to see in that face the man who had written the letter, who had built the piano with his own hands, who had created music the world wasn't ready to hear. He looked tired. He looked dignified. He looked like someone who had endured more than anyone should have to endure, and was still standing. "Hello, Thomas," I whispered to the photograph. "I found your music, and I'm going to make sure the world hears it." The final piece of verification came from the piano itself. I had sent samples of the wood, the glue, the strings to a laboratory that specialized in dating historical materials. They used carbon dating and dendrochronology, the study of tree rings in the wood, to determine when the piano had been built. The results came back unequivocal. The wood had been cut between 1865 and 1867. The glue was consistent with homemade adhesives from that period. The strings were hand-wound, which was typical for pianos built before mass manufacturing. Everything confirmed that the piano, and by extension the hidden music, was authentic. We had our verification. We had our story. Now we needed to bring Thomas Freeman's music to life. Finding the right musician to perform Thomas Freeman's compositions was crucial. This wasn't just about technical skill, though that was certainly necessary. This was about finding someone who could understand the historical and cultural context, who could honor Thomas's intentions, who could bridge the gap between 1867 and today. I thought of Catherine Williams immediately. Catherine is a pianist I'd met several years earlier when she'd brought me a 1950s Baldwin that had belonged to her grandmother. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and I'd attended several of her performances. She specialized in what she called recovery work, finding forgotten or overlooked compositions by women and composers of color, and bringing them to modern audiences. If anyone could do justice to Thomas Freeman's music, it was Catherine. I called her and explained briefly what we'd found. I didn't give her all the details over the phone. I just said I had something I wanted her to see. She arrived at my workshop the next day. Catherine is in her mid-40s with close-cropped natural hair and an intensity that radiates from her even when she's sitting still. She's the kind of musician who doesn't just play music, she inhabits it. I showed her the piano first, telling her the story of how I'd found it, what we'd discovered hidden inside. Then, I showed her the letter. She read it in complete silence, and when she finished, there were tears streaming down her face. "May I see the music?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I brought out the carefully preserved pages, now in protective sleeves, and laid them on my work table. Catherine approached them like they were sacred relics. She didn't touch them at first, just looked. Her eyes scanning the notation, her fingers moving slightly, as if she were already playing the notes in her mind. "This is remarkable," she finally said. "This is absolutely remarkable. Can you hear it? Can you hear what he's doing here?" She pointed to a passage on the second page. "This is a spiritual. This melody line is from Wade in the Water, I'm almost certain. But he's harmonizing it in a completely unexpected way. And this rhythm underneath this is a work song pattern. He's layering them, creating something that's both familiar and completely new." She moved to another page. "And this is pure African polyrhythm. Two different rhythmic patterns happening simultaneously, creating tension and release. This wouldn't become common in American music for another 50, 60 years. But he's doing it here. He's doing it in 1867. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "I need to play this. I need to learn this music, and I need to play it." Not just for Thomas Freeman, though, absolutely for him, but for every musician who created something beautiful and important, and was ignored or forgotten or silenced. This is bigger than one man's story. This is about recovering voices that were deliberately erased. "Will you do it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Try and stop me," she said with a fierce smile. Over the next 3 weeks, Catherine worked with the sheet music every day. She came to my workshop, where I had set up the restored piano, carefully rebuilt with as many original parts as possible, supplemented only where absolutely necessary for the instrument to be playable. The first few days were slow. Thomas's notation wasn't entirely standard. He had his own way of indicating certain rhythms, his own shorthand for dynamics and expression. Catherine had to decode as much as interpret. She worked with Dr. Holland, the musicologist, to understand the historical context of certain passages. She consulted with scholars of African American music to understand the spiritual and folk song traditions that Thomas was drawing from. She listened to early recordings of field hollers and spirituals to understand the vocal inflections that Thomas might have been trying to capture on piano. Slowly, piece by piece, the music came to life. I'll never forget the first time she played one of Thomas's compositions all the way through. It was a piece he'd titled simply "Freedom Song." The music started quietly, almost hesitantly. A simple melody that sounded like it could have been a spiritual. But then the rhythm shifted, became more complex. The left hand started a pattern that felt like a heartbeat, steady and insistent. The right hand began to improvise around the melody, adding embellishments that felt spontaneous and joyful. The music built and built, becoming more confident, more exuberant. There was a section in the middle where the rhythm broke completely, became almost chaotic, and then suddenly resolved into a triumphant major key progression that felt like breaking through a wall into sunlight. When Catherine finished, she sat for a moment with her hands still on the keys, breathing hard. "That's what freedom sounds like," she said quietly. "That's what it sounds like to go from bondage to liberty. You can hear the whole journey in the music. The sorrow, the struggle, the moment of breakthrough, the joy on the other side." I realized I was crying. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine learned all 15 pieces. Some were short, just a few minutes long. Others were extended compositions, 10 or 15 minutes of complex, evolving musical ideas. Each piece was different. Each one told a story. River Crossing sounded like water flowing like movement and journey. Sarah's song was tender and mournful, clearly written after Thomas's wife died. The church gathering incorporated hymn melodies with jubilant, almost celebratory rhythms. Night music was slow and contemplative, full of space and silence and whispered harmonies. And then there was the final piece, the longest one. Thomas had titled it Our Voices. This piece was different from the others. It was more complex, more ambitious. It started with a single note, played softly, repeatedly, like a heartbeat. Then another note joined it, and another. Building slowly, adding layers, adding voices. The piece incorporated elements from all the other compositions. Fragments of melodies, rhythmic patterns, harmonic ideas. It was like Thomas had taken everything he'd created and woven it together into one final statement. The music swelled and grew, becoming almost overwhelming in its intensity. And then, about halfway through, it changed. The European harmonic structure that had been underlying everything fell away, and what remained was pure African rhythm and melody. Polyrhythms layered over polyrhythms. Call and response. The sound of voices raised together in song. It lasted almost a minute, this section, and then slowly, gradually, the European harmony came back, but transformed. It didn't dominate the African elements anymore. They existed together, equal partners, creating something that was neither African nor European, but genuinely American. Genuinely new. The piece ended quietly, the same single note it had started with. But now it felt different. It felt like resolution, like arrival, like home. When Catherine finished playing it for the first time, she sat motionless for several minutes. Then she turned to me and said, "We need to perform this publicly. We need to let people hear what Thomas Freeman created. We need to give him the audience he never got to have." Where I asked. She smiled. Preservation Hall. Where else? Preservation Hall is a legendary venue in the French Quarter dedicated to preserving and celebrating traditional New Orleans jazz. It seemed perfect. It seemed right. Samuel made the arrangements. He spoke with the people who ran Preservation Hall, explained what we'd found, what it meant. They agreed immediately to host a special performance. We set a date, 3 weeks away. Enough time to prepare to publicize, to make sure this event was what it deserved to be. And then we told the world what we'd found. The story of Thomas Freeman and his hidden music went viral almost immediately. Samuel published an article in a historical journal. I gave interviews to local news stations. Catherine posted videos of herself practicing the compositions on social media. Within days, the story was everywhere. National news picked it up. Music websites wrote features. The New York Times ran a front-page story with the headline, "Lost Music from Reconstruction Era Reveals Proto-Jazz Composer." The response was overwhelming. Music scholars called wanting to study the compositions. Museums called wanting to exhibit the piano and the sheet music. People from all over the country reached out, sharing their own stories of forgotten ancestors, lost histories, erased voices. The concert at Preservation Hall sold out in less than an hour. They opened up a live stream so people who couldn't attend in person could watch online. More than 50,000 people registered to watch. The night of the performance, I arrived at Preservation Hall 2 hours early. The venue was already buzzing with activity. Camera crews setting up, sound technicians checking levels, journalists interviewing Samuel and Dr. Holland and anyone else they could grab. I had brought the piano, the actual piano that Thomas Freeman had built with his own hands. Moving it had been a nightmare of logistics and insurance and white-knuckle anxiety, but it was worth it. Thomas's music needed to be played on Thomas's instrument. That felt essential. We'd set up a special display in the lobby. The piano, of course, but also enlarged photographs of the sheet music of Thomas's letter of the charcoal drawings we'd found inside the instrument. We'd included the carved cross memorializing Sarah Freeman. We'd displayed copies of the historical documents we'd found, the census records, and newspaper clippings, and Caroline Beaumont's letter. People filed through the display in reverent silence, reading every word, studying every image. I stood to the side watching them, and I felt Thomas Freeman's presence so strongly, it was almost like he was standing beside me. At 7:30, the doors to the performance hall opened. The space seated about 100 people, and every seat was filled. The audience was diverse in every way, young and old, black and white, and everything in between. Musicians and historians, and people who just loved a good story. Samuel gave a brief introduction, explaining how the piano had been found, what we'd discovered hidden inside, what it meant historically and culturally. His voice shook with emotion as he spoke. Then he introduced Catherine. She walked onto the small stage to thunderous applause. She was wearing a simple black dress, her only jewelry, a pair of earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She sat at Thomas's piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The room fell absolutely silent. Thomas Freeman, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet space, created this music in 1867. He was a man who had been enslaved, a man who taught himself to read music in secret, a man who dared to imagine that he could create art, could make beauty, could have a voice in a world that tried to silence him. He built this piano with his own hands. He composed music that was decades ahead of its time. And then he hid it away with a prayer that someday someone would find it and play it. Tonight, 153 years later, we honor that prayer. This is Thomas Freeman's music. These are our voices. She began to play. The first piece was Freedom Song, the one she'd played for me that first day. Even though I'd heard it before, even though I'd heard Catherine practice it dozens of times, hearing it now in this space with this audience was completely different. The music filled the hall, and I could feel it working on everyone in the room. You could hear the journey in it, the sorrow, the struggle, the breakthrough, the joy. People were crying openly. Catherine moved through the program piece by piece, river crossing with its flowing water-like passages, the church gathering with its jubilant rhythms, night music with its contemplative beauty. She played Sarah's song, and I thought about Thomas Freeman grieving his young wife, pouring that grief into music. The melody was simple, but heartbreaking, full of tenderness and loss. Between pieces, Catherine spoke briefly about what we'd learned about Thomas's life, about the world he lived in, about what each composition represented. She spoke about the African musical traditions he was drawing on, the European techniques he was incorporating, the new American sound he was creating. The audience was completely absorbed. I could see people leaning forward in their seats. I could see them wiping their eyes. I could see them nodding along with the rhythms, feeling the music in their bodies. And then Catherine announced the final piece. Our Voices. This is Thomas Freeman's masterwork, she said, his most ambitious composition. It's a synthesis of everything he created, everything he learned, everything he experienced. It's about individuals coming together to create something larger than themselves. It's about finding your voice and joining it with others. It's about survival and resistance and joy in the face of oppression. It's about being human. She placed her hands on the keys and began. I'd heard this piece before. I'd heard Catherine practice it, but nothing had prepared me for hearing it performed fully in front of an audience on the piano Thomas had built. The single note that started the piece seemed to resonate in the very walls of the hall. As Catherine added more notes, more layers, the music seemed to grow beyond the instrument, beyond the room, becoming something almost physical. I watched the audience. Some had their eyes closed, just listening. Some were watching Catherine's hands move across the keys. Some were looking at the piano itself, this artifact that had survived so much. When the piece reached the section where the European harmony fell away, and what remained was pure African rhythm and melody, I saw something remarkable happen. People started moving, just slightly. A sway, a nod, a tap of the foot. The music was pulling it out of them, this physical response, this bodily connection to rhythm that went back centuries. And when the harmony came back, transformed, integrated, creating something new, I felt the shift in the room. This wasn't just music anymore. This was a statement. This was proof. This was Thomas Freeman across 150 years saying, "We were here. We created. We mattered." Our voices deserve to be heard. The piece built to its climax, Catherine's hands moving faster, the music becoming almost overwhelming in its intensity and joy and defiance. And then it resolved. That single note again. Quiet. Peaceful. Complete. Catherine held the final note until it faded completely into silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10-15. And then the audience exploded. People were on their feet, applauding, cheering, crying. The standing ovation went on for 5 full minutes. Catherine stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She gestured to the piano, to Thomas Freeman's creation, acknowledging that the real artist was the man who had built it and composed the music 150 years ago. After the applause finally died down, people didn't leave. They gathered around the piano, around the display, wanting to touch the instrument, wanting to look more closely at the sheet music, wanting to connect with this piece of history we'd unearthed. A woman in her 70s came up to me, her face wet with tears. My grandfather, she said, was a musician. He played blues guitar in Mississippi in the 1930s. He died before I was born, and no one ever recorded his music. It's just gone. But hearing this, knowing that Thomas Freeman's music survived, it gives me hope that maybe somewhere, somehow, my grandfather's voice is still out there too. A young man, probably in his 20s, told me he was a music student studying jazz composition. "This changes everything I thought I knew about where jazz came from," he said. "Thomas Freeman needs to be in every textbook. Every music student needs to know his name." A journalist from NPR interviewed me, then Samuel, then Catherine, then audience members capturing reactions, collecting stories. The live stream had been watched by over 200,000 people worldwide. Social media was exploding with responses. Musicians were already talking about recording the compositions. Scholars were already writing papers about the historical significance. Thomas Freeman, forgotten for 150 years, was finally getting his audience. I stood to the side watching it all unfold, and I thought about the letter. If you find this, play it. Let them hear us. We had done it. We had honored his request. We had let the world hear. The performance at Preservation Hall was just the beginning. Within a week, every major music publication had run features on Thomas Freeman and his rediscovered compositions. NPR did a full hour-long special. The BBC ran a documentary. Streaming services were negotiating for the rights to create a limited series about the discovery. Catherine recorded all 15 compositions in a professional studio using Thomas's piano. The album was released by a major classical music label and debuted at #1 on the classical charts. It stayed there for 6 weeks. The recordings were extraordinary. Catherine had worked with the best sound engineers, capturing not just the music, but the character of the instrument itself. You could hear the slight unevenness in some of the keys, the quirks of tone that came from hand-wound strings and hand-carved hammers. You could hear the age and the history and the story in every note. Critics were unanimous in their praise. The New York Times called it one of the most important musical discoveries of the century. The Guardian wrote, "Catherine Williams doesn't just play Thomas Freeman's music, she resurrects it, giving voice to a man history tried to silence." Music scholars descended on the compositions, analyzing them, contextualizing them, understanding their place in the development of American music. Dr. Holland published a comprehensive paper arguing that Thomas Freeman should be recognized as one of the earliest documented creators of what would become jazz. Other musicologists supported his conclusion. Textbooks began to be revised. Curricula began to change. Thomas Freeman's name was entering the historical record permanently. The Smithsonian Institution formally requested the piano and the sheet music for their permanent collection. Samuel and I had to make a difficult decision. The historian in Samuel wanted them preserved in a national museum where they would be cared for and studied by future generations. But the part of me that had found the piano, that had felt Thomas's presence, didn't want to let it go. We compromised. The piano and the original sheet music would go to the Smithsonian, but they would be displayed in a special exhibit that would tell Thomas's full story. The exhibit would include the charcoal drawings, the carved cross, Sarah Freeman's memorial, the letter, all the historical documents we'd found. It would be comprehensive and permanent. Before the piano was moved, we held one final performance in New Orleans. This one was free and open to the public, held outdoors in Congo Square, the historic gathering place where enslaved and freed people had played music and danced in the 18th and 19th centuries. 5,000 people attended. They sat on the grass, stood at the edges, filled every available space. Catherine played selections from Thomas's compositions as the sun set over the city. When she finished, a local choir sang spirituals and work songs connecting Thomas's music to its roots, showing the lineage of sound and rhythm that had survived across centuries. The city of New Orleans declared a Thomas Freeman Day, honoring him as an important figure in the city's musical history. The New Orleans African American Museum created a permanent exhibit about Thomas and the broader context of Black musicians and composers in the Reconstruction era. St. Augustine Church, where Thomas had been a deacon, installed a plaque in his memory. The small plot of land where Thomas had lived and worked was located and marked with a historical marker. His unmarked grave was found in the cemetery records, and a proper headstone was installed. It read, Thomas Freeman, 1840, chapter 1889. Musician, composer, builder. His voice was silenced, but his music survived. Let them hear us. On the day the headstone was unveiled, hundreds of people gathered. Musicians played Thomas's compositions. Historians spoke about his significance. Community members shared what his story meant to them. I stood at the back of the crowd watching, and I felt a sense of completion. Thomas Freeman had been found. His story had been told. His music had been heard. But the impact went beyond Thomas himself. His story inspired other people to look for forgotten voices, lost histories, erased contributions. Archives across the country reported an increase in requests from people researching their ancestors, trying to find evidence of creative work that might have been overlooked or deliberately suppressed. Music conservatories began dedicating more resources to studying early African American composers and musicians. Grants were established for research into overlooked contributions to American music. A foundation was created in Thomas's name, dedicated to supporting young Black musicians and composers, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The proceeds from Catherine's recording went to fund the foundation. Within the first year, the Thomas Freeman Foundation had awarded 50 scholarships and funded 10 community music programs in underserved neighborhoods. His legacy was growing, spreading, touching lives in ways he never could have imagined. I received letters from people all over the world. A man in Ghana who said Thomas's story reminded him of the importance of preserving oral musical traditions. A woman in Brazil who was researching the African influences on Brazilian music and found parallels to what Thomas had been doing. A teenager in Atlanta who decided to become a music historian after reading about the discovery. The piano went on display at the Smithsonian 6 months after the initial performance. The exhibit was called Voices Reclaimed: Thomas Freeman and the Hidden History of American Music. I attended the opening. The exhibit was beautiful. They had recreated Thomas's workshop as we imagined it might have looked. They had interactive elements where visitors could hear the different pieces and learn about the musical techniques Thomas was using. They had a timeline showing Thomas's life in the context of broader American history. And there, in the center of it all, was the piano. Lit dramatically protected behind glass, but still present, still powerful. I stood in front of it for a long time, remembering the day I'd first seen it in that dusty warehouse, remembering the moment I'd opened the hidden compartment, remembering the first time Catherine had played Thomas's music. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, came and stood beside me. She looked at the piano, then at the placard describing Thomas's story, then back at the piano. "He built this all by himself?" she asked. "He built it with his sons," I told her. "But yes, by hand, without fancy tools or a factory, just his skill and his determination. And people wouldn't listen to his music because he was black," she asked. "That's right," I said. "The world wasn't ready to hear what he had created." She thought about this for a moment. "But we're listening now," she said. "So he won, right?" "In the end, he won," I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. In the end, he won." She nodded, satisfied, and moved on to the next exhibit. But I stayed there looking at that piano, thinking about that little girl's words. He won. Not in his lifetime. Not when it would have mattered to him personally. But his voice had survived. His music had been heard. His story had been told. And that was its own kind of victory. A year has passed since I found Thomas Freeman's piano in that warehouse. A year since I opened the hidden compartment and discovered the music that changed everything. I think about him often. I think about the courage it must have taken to teach himself music in secret, knowing that discovery could mean punishment or death. I think about the dedication required to build a piano by hand without proper tools or materials. I think about the faith he must have had to hide his compositions away with a prayer that someone someday would find them and play them. But most of all, I think about the question his story raises. A question that haunts me in the best possible way. How many voices were lost? How many Thomas Freemans were there? How many brilliant, creative, passionate people who had something important to say, something beautiful to create, but were silenced by the circumstances of their birth, by the color of their skin, by the limitations society placed on them? How much music was never written down, never performed, never recorded? How many paintings were never painted? How many stories were never told? How many inventions were never invented? How many discoveries were never made? Because the people who could have created them were too busy surviving, too busy fighting for basic dignity and freedom, too busy being denied education, resources, opportunities. The losses are incalculable, unimaginable. Thomas Freeman's music survived by pure luck. If that piano had been thrown away instead of stored in an attic, If Patricia Henderson had sold it to someone who would have scrapped it for parts. If I hadn't been curious enough to look closely. If the hidden compartment had been damaged by moisture or insects. If the paper had deteriorated beyond legibility. Any one of 1,000 things could have prevented this music from being found. How many other stories, other voices, other creative works weren't so lucky? I've become obsessed in a way with this question. I've started a project working with historians and archivists to search for other overlooked or forgotten artists from the Reconstruction era and beyond. We're combing through estate sales, attic cleanouts, storage units, anywhere that might hold hidden treasures. We've found some remarkable things. A collection of poems written by a formerly enslaved woman who taught herself to read at age 40. A set of paintings by a black artist who had been a sharecropper in Alabama. Sheet music for songs written by a community choir in Mississippi. Each discovery feels like a small victory, like we're pushing back against the erasure, the forgetting, the deliberate suppression of voices that deserved to be heard. But for every voice we recover, I know there are thousands we'll never find. Thousands whose creative work is simply gone lost to time and circumstance. That knowledge sits heavy on my heart. But Thomas Freeman's story also gives me hope. It tells me that creativity and beauty and art can survive against incredible odds. It tells me that people will create even when creating is dangerous, even when no one is listening, even when they have no expectation of recognition or reward. Thomas Freeman composed music not for fame or fortune, but because he had to. Because the music was in him and needed to come out. Because it was his way of making sense of the world, of processing his experiences, of asserting his humanity in a world that tried to deny it. And he created with the faith that someday, somehow, his voice would matter. That someone would hear and understand and care. That faith was rewarded. 153 years later, but rewarded nonetheless. His story has changed how I see my own work. Restoration isn't just about fixing broken instruments anymore. It's about recovering voices. It's about making space for stories that have been marginalized or forgotten. It's about recognizing that history isn't just what's in textbooks, but what's hidden in attics and warehouses and buried in archives waiting to be found. Every object I work on, now I approach with the question, what story does this tell? Whose voice does this represent? What can this teach us about people and times we thought we understood? Thomas Freeman taught me to look deeper, to listen more carefully, to never assume that something is worthless just because it's been forgotten. He taught me that the most important stories are often the ones we almost lost. And he taught me that our responsibility as people alive today is to listen to those stories, to honor them, to make sure they're not forgotten again. Samuel is writing a book about Thomas and the broader context of Black musicians in post-Civil War America. It's going to be comprehensive, academic, important. It's going to make sure that Thomas's story is preserved not just in museums, but in the scholarly record. Catherine has become an advocate for recovering and performing works by overlooked composers. She's commissioned new pieces from living Black composers. She's created a concert series dedicated to Voices Reclaimed, where each performance features music that almost disappeared. As for me, I keep working. I keep restoring instruments. I keep looking for hidden compartments and secret messages and stories waiting to be told. And I think about Thomas Freeman. Often, I imagine him in his small workshop in Tremé, building his piano, writing his music, hiding it away with hope. I imagine him wondering if anyone would ever find it, if anyone would ever care. And I wish I could tell him, "We found it, Thomas. We heard you. Your voice matters, Your music survives. You are not forgotten. If you're listening to this story, I want you to think about something. What's hidden around you? What stories are waiting in your grandmother's attic, in your local library's archive, in the storage unit of a community center, in the basement of a church? What voices are waiting to be recovered? Because they're there. I promise you, they're there. History isn't just what happened. It's what survived. And so much didn't survive. So much was deliberately destroyed or carelessly discarded or simply forgotten. But sometimes, if we're lucky, if we're paying attention, if we're willing to look beneath the dust and the damage and the years, we find something that was meant to be lost but refused to disappear. We find a piano with a hidden compartment. We find sheet music stained with blood and hope. We find a letter that says, "If you find this, play it. Let them hear us." And when we do, we have a responsibility. Not just to preserve, though that's important, but to amplify, to share. To make sure that the voices that were silenced get to speak. The piano that Thomas Freeman built with his own hands now sits in the Smithsonian, where hundreds of thousands of people have seen it. His music has been performed in concert halls around the world. His name is in textbooks and scholarly articles, and on a headstone that marks his final resting place. He has been heard. But there are so many more stories waiting. So many more voices that deserve to be recovered. Maybe you'll be the one to find the next Thomas Freeman. Maybe you'll be the one to open the hidden compartment to read the letter, to play the music. Maybe you'll be the one to say, "I found it. I heard you." Your voice matters. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think about hidden histories and forgotten voices, then share it. Tell people about Thomas Freeman. Tell them that creativity and art and beauty survive even against impossible odds. Tell them that everyone deserves to be heard. And if you want to help recover more voices, more stories, more hidden treasures, there are ways to do that. Support local archives and historical societies. Donate to organizations working to preserve African American history and culture. Fund music education programs in underserved communities. Commission works from living artists whose voices have been marginalized. Every action, no matter how small, pushes back against forgetting. Every recovered voice is a victory. Thomas Freeman's piano isn't just an artifact. It's a reminder, a challenge, a call to action. It says, look deeper. Listen more carefully. Don't assume that anything or anyone is worthless, because hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting patiently through decades or centuries, are voices that need to be heard. All we have to do is find them. And when we do, we must play them. We must let them be heard. Thank you for listening to Thomas Freeman's story. Thank you for hearing his voice. And now I hope you'll go out and find your own hidden compartment, your own forgotten voice, your own piece of history waiting to be recovered. They're out there, waiting. Just like Thomas's music waited for 153 years, waiting to be found, waiting to be heard, waiting to matter.